Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Star Citizen Live Engine and Graphics Q&A. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee. Welcome once again back to my half IKEA, half still unpacked luggage home office. I'm Jared Huckabee, creative content lead for Cloud Imperium Games, Robert Space Industries. And if you've never seen Star Citizen Live before, it's where we take about an hour out of our week and chat with some developers, usually about their work, usually about the stuff that they're either working on or the stuff they're about to work on, or the stuff that they've worked on in the past that people still have questions and stuff about. Joining us on the show this week is a menagerie of engine and graphics programmers, directors and sorts. So let's take a few moments, as we usually do, and introduce our coterie of developers this week. Starting to my immediate right with the lovely blue gradient background, Jonas. Who are you, and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Hi, I'm Jonas. I'm working for Star Citizen since 1.5 years, roughly. And I was mainly doing core engine work, like doing profiling tools or internal stuff. One of the fruits of that you could likely see in the last patch with a good performance improvement. We found that due to the new profiling tools or improved profiling tools. And I'm also supporting on the Gen12 work to get that done.
Are you taking credit for all the performance improvements of the last patch?
No, of course not. That's likely something for Bot to take credit for.
All right. Silvan, who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Silvan. I joined CIG 3 years ago. I'm engine programmer as well. Mainly I do graphics work, helping the graphics team, specifically Gen 12, and in the future, most likely Vulcan as well. And usually I do all sorts of things, like wherever I'm needed, I'll just jump in and fix bugs or whatever is required. Well, I'm there.
All right, fair enough. And a man who probably needs no introduction, but we're going to do it anyway because every show is somebody's first show. Mr. Ali Brown, who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Hey, I'm Ali Brown. I'm the Director of Graphics Engineering. So cover the graphics department and the VFX programming department, and then work very closely with the guys in the engine department in Frankfurt. And I've been here since the beginning, pretty much.
Yeah, you have. You're one of the. You got to be close to your 10-year at this point, right?
I think the UK studio has been going 8.5 or something.
Yeah, all right. So today's show is plainly labeled as Engine and Graphics Q&A. We're basically going to answer questions related to engineering, graphics engineering, Gen 12 renderer, all that, ray tracing, all that good stuff. As usual, you can submit your questions live in the chat during the show by prefacing your question with the word question in capital letters surrounded by brackets. And we spent the week collecting questions, as we usually do, letting you guys vote up which ones you wanted to see answered most, and then going through there, stripping the ones that you guys voted up that were still off topic for this group, and then finding the ones that were actually appropriate for our esteemed colleagues today. So we're going to start right in with that. I think the biggest topic for anything engine and graphics is probably Gen 12 Vulcan stuff. So we'll jump into the more heavily trafficked stuff. This question says, what are the differences between Gen 12 and Vulcan, and how are they related to get more optimization in the game?
Yeah, that's probably a question for me. Probably the best question to start with, since I'm working on it pretty much full time. And for the people who still don't know what the difference is, that's pretty much like we've already published a lot of videos about it and other people talked about it. But Gen 12 is basically our internal engine rendering architecture for how rendering works, and Vulkan is the underlying graphics API, which one day hopefully not hopefully, but which one day replaces the DirectX graphics API. And yeah, Vulkan, the benefit of Vulkan is pretty much performance. It scales much better on multiple CPUs and threads. So, well, yeah, performance. We all love performance, and we all seen what it can do in 3.17. So, yeah, if everything goes to plan, performance will get even better the coming patches. So I'm very excited for that, especially after we shipped one of our first milestones in 3.17 about Gen 12. And yeah, I'm working hard on it to get it done.
What was that milestone that just shipped in 3.17?
So Gen 12 is, so you can kind of split it up in two parts, like all the scene rendering, like all the objects you see on screen, and then all the other rendering stuff like post-processing and compute passes and pretty much everything else. And the scene rendering is especially difficult was especially difficult to do because we have like hundreds of shaders and thousands of shader permutations and thousands of materials, and we need to make sure that everything works exactly as the legacy renderer. And yeah, we had a lot of issues and edge cases which you don't see during development. So just once you submit your code and it crashes somewhere, and then you just take a look and see, oh shit, okay, that's what happens. Okay, I forgot to add this, so I'm gonna add this edge case. Yeah, and so the first milestone was getting part of the scene rendering done. And for 3.17, that was the brushes. The brushes is what we call like all the non-interactive static objects you see in game. These are the brushes, and yeah, they're going through Gen 12 already. And the next step would be characters, ships, dynamic objects, and the planets didn't make it in 3.17 as well, though also the objects on the planet, they made it in 3.17 as well with Gen 12, so happy about that. Yeah, so once we have that, Gen 12 is almost complete. We still need to do all the transparent objects, which is still a huge task to tackle. But yeah, we started on that, and I'm very optimistic.
I know we've hit the performance thing, kind of hard there. Are there benefits to the switch to a Gen 12 renderer that aren't performance related? I mean, do we get does the quality of the render improve? Are there better visuals all around, or is this strictly just a performance improvement kind of thing?
Gen 12 is strictly just performance, but of course, Adi also mentioned that in previous talks. Pretty much it gives us more room for more fancy stuff, and like we can use all the new fancy features in Vulkan, like ray tracing and what else there is. So not just performance.
How's that battle work, Ali? That you get all these performance improvements, and then you start adding more and more features and more visual elements, and that start taking up those performance gains that you just made for yourself. How do you balance that?
Well, ironically, a lot of the new technology we have actually saves you performance. So it initially, it might even go the other way. Like it enables a whole bunch of features with things like the mesh shading and variable rate shading, and sometimes not even technology, but more just like not hardware technology, but internal, like because we've restructured the renderer, we can now do certain things much easier than we could before. So there's lots of opportunities now for optimizations that we may not have had before. So it might actually be like a double win. We after this can implement some improvements. And there's features that I know that there's questions about later about DLSS or FSR and these type of technologies, which were type of problematic to implement halfway through, when we're doing the conversion to Gen 12. So then they become on the table again once we've type of settled on a single new renderer. So I don't think it's the end of the performance improvements once we've got to Gen 12. But yeah, there is also a few that would go the other direction and lose us performance. But future battle, we'll see how fast we can make it first before we worry too much about how much we'll slow it down in the future. A big focus we want to do is to make the engine scalable. So hopefully any new shiny things we add can be scaled up and down, ideally, so that we don't have to, you can keep the game running on the lower spec, but push it hard on the high spec.
And completing Gen 12 is just the first step to a series of more optimizations we already planned out. So expect much more to come after Gen 12 is done.
Yeah, we've got it as if on the milestones, as if like Gen 12 and Vulkan are like, a concrete thing that is not done and then one day is done. That's not quite true. It's useful for scheduling to type of make that type of appear true, but it's not as precise as that. So yeah, there's continuous set of features, and even Vulkan, that will introduce new performance. Or it might, detriment performance in some areas, might improve performance in some areas, and as we learn more, we'll be able to get more performance out of Vulkan. So yeah, it won't just be we're done and we never look at this thing again. But the milestones were mentioned a type of a point of confidence when we think, yeah, that's like 99%. That's most of what we were the biggest chunk of work is done.
I think that's probably a perennial concern with all aspects of Star Citizen, because this is not just a make it until one day and it's done kind of thing. The development of Star Citizen it just continues. It's like any other MMO. You're continuously iterating and developing stuff. I think I understand, having come from the community so long ago, this desire to just put a bow on something and say it's done. It's just not the way this project works. This project is constantly about pushing those boundaries and seeing what's possible and stuff. It's been in our DNA since the beginning. So it's always like everything. It's a delicate balance between not wanting to just lead people on forever, but also just reporting things accurately and honestly and effectively. One of the questions here is from somebody who's clearly looked at our I can't remember what it's called right now. I'm blanking on the name. The thing that shows the performance for all of our players and stuff. That cool graph I'm blanking on the name. It says, I see many folks with older graphics cards like the 970 and 1080 cards. Those 1080 cards are really good though. Will those by chance see an FPS boost after Gen 12 and Vulkan? Telemetry. Thank you, people. Telemetry. Couldn't think of the word.
Yeah, I will try to answer that. So the goal of Gen 12 in the first place is to improve CPU performance. So in case you run an older CPU with your old GPU, you might see an improvement because we can better utilize all the cores of your CPU. But the more likely case is that you're bottlenecked by the GPU, and then Gen 12 won't really bring a benefit there. Vulkan might bring a benefit there, but you never know. We have to measure that. It might bring benefits in one case, but is a drawback in another case. That's hard to tell. But especially when you're rendering with in high resolution, when you're trying to do 4K, then the older graphics cards will most likely be a bottleneck anyway. And Gen 12 won't help there.
Ali, you and I were talking earlier in the week about common misconceptions that gamers have, and where they come from, not just for our project, for all gaming projects. Like everybody's got 12 different things that they all call lag, and stuff like this. There is this assumption that Gen 12 and Vulkan and stuff like this are video card related things, and as we just discussed, they're actually more CPU related. If you had to guess where that misconception comes from, I know this isn't the show. We're just going to clear up a bunch of misconceptions, but I'm curious what your thinking is on why those things often get conflated into video card issues and not CPU issues.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it is stupidly confusing. Like we're working on a renderer and a graphics API, but somehow they don't make the rendering or graphics any faster. It makes no sense. Yeah, but the reality is a lot of the work is feeding these uber powerful type of processors we have, these GPUs with work, and it's hard to keep up, like to give them enough work. And that's why it's a lot of effort for the CPU to keep them fed. And that's why like there's so much work to do on the Gen 12 and the Vulkan side of these graphics APIs and the renderer. But I mean, like we said earlier, the Gen 12 will open doors to optimizations, and then optimizations will and can benefit the GPU, but just the milestone we're mainly focusing on is improving the CPU performance, because that has by far been the biggest bottleneck for most players, and is why somebody with like a 3080 or 3090 might not be seeing the frames they want. Yeah, so for most people, it is the CPU bottleneck. I mean, the range between the cards mentioned there, the 970 and 1080, is quite large. The 1080 is going to be significantly faster. But then obviously resolution, like Jonas said, like is a big factor as well. If you're running a 970, then hopefully you're targeting 1080p and not trying to push too much beyond that. Otherwise you will struggle. Yeah, but I can see there's many reasons why things would be confused in this area. Yeah, I don't know what we can do about that. It is just confusing.
I just embark on a crusade to re-educate the entire games industry. Why not? We got time. As we're talking about performance here, this question says, how come since the Gen 12 renderer was implemented, my performance actually dropped? I get an average of 13 to 17 FPS, no matter the quality or resolution of the game.
Well, that's easy to answer. And in fact, so if whoever's watching, so I posted like a Gen 12 update and progress like 2 weeks ago on the Spectrum. And initially, like I didn't even plan to do that because I didn't expect any performance benefits of Gen 12 in 3.17. But due to the uprising amounts of threads and people talking about these magical improvements in 3.17, and people were wondering where that actually came from, I felt like I had to give an update. So yeah, that's what I did. The thing is, Gen 12 right now, only the brushes, they're rendering in Gen 12, but the big caveat is that our rendering right now, we're mostly limited due to the main thread and not the render thread. So they're like two threads, and it goes very deep into engineering, I would already say. So for everyone who can't follow me right now, I'm sorry. But basically, that's like a render thread, which, as Ali said previously, it's like this kind of thing feeding the rendering work into the GPU. And that with the old legacy renderer is really slow because we constantly, every frame, check every state and see what objects we can render. And Gen 12 uses a different approach by just pre-baking the state in a small object, and then when we render, we just have the entire state ready and can just say GPU, here, render this object. So the render thread I tested it myself. The performance was like with Gen 12, it's more than twice as fast. But if you're not limited by the render thread, which was at least on my machine was mostly the case, like it doesn't give you anything. So that's why I didn't expect any benefits and didn't feel the need to give an update. But yeah, but in the future, if with full Gen 12, that's another thing right now, because we have this mixed mode. We have object rendering with Gen 12 and other objects going through the legacy path. There's actually a cost to that on the main thread, which is the bottleneck, which means, or what I would have expected, Gen 12 would have made it actually a little bit slower. But yeah, that didn't even happen. So I'm happy about that. But once we can get rid of all the legacy stuff and have full Gen 12, then we'll see the full potential. And I'm very excited about that.
Your story is a very common one throughout all of game development. It's one of the reasons, quite honestly, that most games don't do the level of content and interaction that we do. I think because there's a reason it's called game development, not game construction. We don't always know how the thing is going to, what the puzzle is going to look like once we finish putting it together. And it's why when folks ask questions about how much Gen 12 is going to improve performance versus how much server meshing is going to improve versus how much object container streaming is going to, stuff like this, it can often sound like our developers are being cagey, and it's less about being cagey and just not wanting to overpromise on something. It's because there's always these pleasant surprises. There's always we're doing this hoping that this will do the thing we want it to do, and if it does, then awesome. And if it doesn't, then we're going to do something else, trying to hope it does the thing we do. And if that does, great. And if it doesn't, we're going to do something else to try. It never. You don't ever give up. Not on a project like this anyway. Maybe on some other ones I've worked for. But it's hard to make these. It's hard to always speak in these definitive things ahead of time, because a lot of this is being discovered along the way. When you're building something that's never been built before, how do you say how fast it's going to be or how precise it's going to be and stuff? So it's one of the combination best things and sometimes worst things about working on a project of this size, scale, scope, and openness. Let's see if we've got a couple more Gen 12 Vulkan stuff here. We'll just keep them all grouped together. Here's the forever question. Linux support after Vulkan integration. Is this still planned?
Well, I can give a short update on that as well. So for the people who don't know, DirectX only works on Windows. And Vulkan is created by the Kronos group, which also created OpenGL. So this is like a different, OpenGL is like more an old graphics API, and Vulkan is like the new modern graphics API. And these kind of graphics APIs, they also run on various other operating systems. And yeah, Vulkan is like known to run on Windows and on Linux and even on Apple with an additional wrapper. It's called Molten OS, I believe. Molten VK, that's the name. And Christopher Bolti, like he's very keen on the Linux port. And so it's up top on his priority list. So I believe one day we'll see a Linux port.
The other thing I'd add to that is this isn't first-hand knowledge, but second or third-hand knowledge, but the people can already run it using the various layers you get called Proton and Wine on Linux. They can run the game now. I think there was an issue with the easy enter cheat type of blocking that. I don't know if that's been resolved yet, but that was on Epic, I believe, to resolve that. But that does work, but going through these layers that emulate Windows has a major performance cost. Apparently it's playable, some people say, but the use of Vulkan, I've been told, allows it to skip that layer that it has to apply to translate DirectX into something usable. So even if we just had Vulkan and did implement native support for Linux, we would still get much better performance on the rendering by using these layers, because it wouldn't have to emulate DirectX anymore. It would just have to emulate what any other Windows calls, or with the input and the sound and things like this. But obviously the graphics tends to be a huge processor hog. So that not having to do a translation between Windows code and analytic code will save quite a lot there, we're hoping. So it makes that route more viable until we get an actual official, pure Linux, native Linux client running.
I think the folks who had it running on Mac, I think that ended with when they switched to the M1. Like you still do it on the old Intel machines,
Right.
but I think the M1 switch they did killed that. I'm still waiting for the Voodoo 3DFX port, personally. Thanks, Jack Hiroshi, for the joke. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. My thought my mic is quiet. I'm quiet. I have a sore throat. I'm under the weather right now. It's why I'm sweating like a hog and everything. My throat's all scratchy, so I'm just quieter than normal. Let's switch to some graphics stuff. Some stuff. You knew there was going to be a DLSS question and an FSR question, Alex. So let's just jump those ones right away. What can you tell us, if anything, about DLSS or FSR at some point, any point in development?
Must be someone that didn't watch the last Star Citizen Live.
Every show's somebody's first.
Definitely. I mean, upscaling is a very common feature now. Every single console game pretty much uses it. A huge percentage of the AAA PC games use it. It's the, I don't know if it's the future, but it's the current, like, this is the expected way if you want extreme resolutions, unless you have like the fastest graphics card. And even when you do, there's actually reasons that DLSS and FSR can exceed the quality of native resolution in many scenarios. The compromises sometimes, there's artifacts in some situations, but on a stable frame, you can actually get higher quality because it's actually super samples the image beyond the number of pixels you actually have. So it's like a perfect anti-aliased image, or it can theoretically can achieve a perfect anti-aliased image, which a native render cannot. So they're definitely the future, or in the next few years, the way to get to 4K and beyond. In terms of the implementation, we need to just finish Gen 12 first. There's no point. This is like by far the biggest performance improvement is the CPU gains we need to make from Gen 12. The DLSS and FSR or an equivalent are type of top of the list. In terms of the general rendering improvements, we have lots of other work related, the PU and Squadron that we need to get on with. But in terms of general render improvements, these are top of the list. So yeah, definitely. I like I said last time, though, I'm not going to promise one over the other or timelines for them, or whether we even come up with our own one. Epic came up with their own one that is more similar to a hybrid of the two. Who knows? But the existing APIs for DLSS and FSR are theoretically going to be easier to implement than rolling your own one. So that's the most likely scenario, and most likely would be to support both. But we have to see when we get to it. And one thing that makes them a little bit awkward to implement in our engine is because traditionally you render your scene, you upscale it to 4K or whatever, and then you render your UI on top of that. However, our UI is very much in the world in a lot of cases. We have holograms in the world. We have MFDs on ships. We have floating holograms, holographic displays in the ships as well. Mobiglass, all these things. So they're not a flat 2D image projected on top of the render. They're actually part of the world, which makes it problematic because if you try and upscale very intricate text and UI, these algorithms tend to destroy it and do some evil things to it for what you really want to be crystal clear. So we already have a solution which type of splits our rendering so that certain parts of the UI when they get to a certain size on screen or distance, they type of swap to a different mode that renders them and make sure that the post effects don't interfere with them. So we're hoping we can capitalize on that and use the same techniques so we can do FSR or DLSS to the main portion of the scene, and some objects get removed from that and composited on top. But that does make some things complicated for us. So that's a little like, we have to see how it's going to work. It probably won't be bug-free in that sense. We'll have to tweak that till we get it right. But yeah, it's definitely something we need. Upscaling is important. And for the vast majority of our users, I see it as the common route. Some people want to run native, but I think once people have it and they see, especially once they have the CPU gains, which you need. But once you've got CPU gains and you can get 60 and you're like, I can either have native 30 FPS or I can have, upscaled 60 FPS. Maybe I'll, might be an easier choice once they see it.
I'm imagining the Kotaku article now. Star Citizen developer says feature probably not bug free. Let's see. While we're on graphics, let's just do our greatest hits here. How is HDR support coming along?
I'll throw that one to Silvan.
I talked to our developer who works on that, and right now he other priorities took over that task, so it's on hold right now. But he's doing home office right now a lot of the time, but and he has like a super fancy HDR monitor in the office. So once he comes back, which hopefully soon, and we even going to move into the new office soon, which I'm super excited about. Hopefully then he can take it on and finish it, because I'm very much interested in that as well. Oh, for everyone who doesn't know what HDR is, it means high dynamic range. Basically, it means colors from a monitor can be much more brighter and vivid than a standard monitor like everyone's used to. So, and rendering and physically based rendering, which most engines these days do, they already render in HDR, and then as a post-process effect, all those colors get like compressed into what we call low dynamic range, LDR, and that's what your monitor, after some other fancy post-processing effects like gamma, needs to be applied. But yeah, that's the story for something else. But yeah. So
I think
hopefully.
So a bunch of the support I think has been done. I think the last I looked, the tasks that were remaining to make that fully finished, there's 3 of them, I think. So we have color processing is something the artists apply, where they want to set the mood of a scene, and I want a blue tinted sky, and they don't make they won't tint the actual sky when they want to achieve a mood. That they render the sky physically accurate, and then they just post process. If you imagine a bad example, that every nighttime scene in a film is filmed in daylight, then they just make it blue. It's an exaggeration, but that's type of the approach. So sometimes the artists use these things, usually quite subtly, but that process is currently mapping one low dynamic range color into another low dynamic range color. The process becomes a bit more complicated when you're dealing with high dynamic range colors. When they say they want to turn a white sky to blue, or or blue sky to white, it gets more complicated. There's now millions of shades of white, millions of shades of blue. Like how, did you just mean the very bright blues, or the ultra bright blues, or the extremely bright blues? So that process needs to be changed, and it involves changing the art pipeline a little bit and how they author the color correction. And the 2 other issues are we have what we call the gain post effects, which are like not the critical rendering ones, like color correction or our type of lighting and blurs and things like this, but there's like when you've been shot, blood appears on the screen, or you're blacking out, and these types of effects, they all run in low dynamic range, so they all need convert into high dynamic range, so they type of don't lose the quality. Otherwise, they'll appear very dull if we don't do that. And then the final one is there's the more open-ended one. When people say this game has a good HDR implementation and this game has a bad one, that's type of, like Silvan said, we already rendered the game in HDR. The problem is even the HDR monitor isn't actually, it's high, but it's not infinite dynamic range. We would stop there. If we had infinite dynamic range, we'd just give you the image we rendered, but that's not the case. So what you have to do is you have to query the monitor, find out what range it's got, and type of do a best guess of how bright you think you should render the image and how you should gamma correct the image, and then probably also give some sliders for the user so they can type of tweak it themselves. But that can be a hugely subjective point of view, and only, like I say, different games get either praised or beaten for how amazing or terrible their HDR implementation is. But it's really just that last part in the pipeline that people get upset over. So yeah, that type of, we need to just balance that and make sure we expose the right knobs and tweaks to get everyone to get the image they want on their monitor.
It doesn't help that there's probably a dozen HDR standards or half dozen HDR standards.
Yeah, lots of color spaces, lots of different ranges, different ways of interpreting things. It's a bit of a minefield. Yeah.
You mentioned, well, you sort of mentioned night vision, but you got close enough that we can't avoid it. Now, the question that comes up for every other team, and they keep putting it, I always put it off to the graphics team. What can you tell us, if anything, about night vision tools? Any option for players to improve their experience flying or fighting at night?
Last time this came up, you promised you were going to lynch Todd Pappy. So I think you should follow through on that promise and get him. And because we need, I have technical ideas and thoughts on that, but we need the design. Like, is night vision in the future the same as now? Is it infrared? Or is it based on, some other form of technology? But yeah, what I've mentioned in the past is that if you want to do it really well, then you you emulate what we call spectral rendering, which is an incredibly complicated field, but there's elements of it you can simulate where you can type of identify the materials that have a non-standard way of reflecting infrared light, which would be like anything that glows in the dark or appears to glow in the dark on an infrared camera, which is type of like reflective gear, like your I don't know, I can't think of any good examples right now, but there's certain materials that type of don't reflect as you'd expect. So they need picking out specially, otherwise doesn't look right in night vision. Otherwise it's type of a filter. You need to type of take your colors and type of, it's a complicated topic. It's hard to type of break it down, but what we see as red, green, and blue is obviously not the true picture of what happens in reality. In reality, there's millions of wavelengths of light, infinite wavelengths along a spectrum. And then infrared is just looking at one portion of that spectrum, but the artist doesn't model what happens in that different spectrum. They just model what happens in these very free specific spectrums that the human eye can see. So we have to type of map or guess, how do we get from the artist altered colors to the type of the infrared spectrum or whatever spectrum our imaginary night vision might be. And there's ways of approximating that, or you can offer custom textures if you want to, like, say, if the artist can tell this is exactly what it looks like in infrared. But we clearly can't go and remake every texture in the entire game to show how the infrared would work if we double the textures in the game. So you normally do like some type of automated mapping that guesses on type of a best guess approach, and then you type of override the particularly special case ones. But yeah, it's all got to start with Todd and the request.
Right. Okay.
So
no, you did good. You did good. The next time I ask the question will be to Todd. He's actually I don't think he's actually been on a show since the last time we had you on. He's managed to avoid it thus far. How is the graphics system going to accommodate large fleet battles, greater than 50 fighters plus multiple capital ships? The lighting budget alone would seem too crazy for that scenario as things are right now. What do you got for me, Jonas?
Yeah. Right now you will very likely be CPU bound in this situation because so many ships, they all need to go through the render thread alone. But with the upcoming Gen 12 changes, it's hopeful the changes that we make will very likely improve that, at least from the rendering side, because we can distribute the work more evenly across your CPU cores, and that should help there. But of course, there are other systems than just rendering that you need to keep in mind, for example, AI or game code or physics or whatever, that also take the part on the CPU. So Gen 12 will, of course, improve it, but it's hard to say how much. Sorry.
All right.
I was going to say on the lighting side, because I was mentioning the question as well, the lighting tends not to be a big issue in space. Obviously, space is mostly pretty dark. Not too much light going around there. We obviously can potentially have lights on the lasers, but they're quite easy also to type of LOD out if we were particularly struggling for performance. Ironically, we're in a big ship battle. One of the things that hurts us quite hard is the interior of the spaceships. We don't have a great way of not rendering the interiors of spaceships. So obviously if you can't see a window, then we color them out, or if they're very far away, we color them out. But if you can see in the spaceship, or you have something like the 600i with all its glass, you can't just not render it. You need an approximation of what's inside that room. And that's quite difficult to make. You can't just fade it to black, because say 600i is a very bright interior. If it just fades to black, it looks really bizarre. So one thing we were planning is to use type of, we have these cube maps, we call them environment probes, which they're used in the lighting system to type of capture the environment and then reflect it. As a substitute for type of more advanced ray tracing reflections. So we were planning on using them to type of render a low quality version of the room. The type of would be indistinguishable at the distances we're talking about, but would be the correct colors and have the correct type of geometry in there. So that would give us a way of basically coloring all the interiors of the ships when we've got a massive fleet battle going on, and we don't really care exactly how the interior looks, just as long as it's the right color and rough shape of the geometry inside. So that would help, and that would save us the lighting cost of all these interiors, which would But I think largely it's a CPU issue, like Jonas said. So Gen 12, that definitely are part of the problem. We'd have to see profile what the physics and other threads are doing. I'm sure they'd have optimizations to do as well.
For everyone who's interested how these interiors could be rendered, just check out some footages from the latest Spider-Man games on PlayStation, how they do it. That's an example on how you can do it.
How's the tech coming which replaces the windows of buildings with the 3D looking interior? The new window shader. How's that coming?
I think that's exactly what Jonas mentioned, I believe. Do they do that in the Spider-Man, Jonas?
The interior mapping?
Yeah, they do.
I was literally staring at the question when you hit it, so I was like, I'll just ask it now.
Yeah, so we already have this kind of, what we call it, interior shader in our engine, just as a standalone shader right now. And I actually didn't know about it like a month ago before I've seen it in game, because I had to fix a bug for Gen 12 on it. So I've seen it live in the engine, and I was already impressed. It looks pretty damn cool, and we're already experimenting right now in engine with it, and so I'm optimistic that we're gonna see it very soon. But yeah, it's mostly art side now who has to implement it and test and iterate on it and make sure that it looks good. But from the technology side, everything's looking good.
So it's at the point where it's ready for artists to start playing with it, and then they're going to discover all the bugs and all the problems with it, and then they'll come back to you to fix it. And then,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, they're already playing with it, and I'm excited to see it in engine. It definitely gonna give some more life to those buildings when you can actually see inside.
With all the great optimizations seen in 3.17, do you have plans to have ship lights cast shadows in the near future? Also helmet lights. I liked how they buttered you up with some compliments at the beginning, and then asked something not related to it whatsoever. But ship lights casting shadows, that's a big one.
We've gone back and forth that a few times internally. I don't. It's controlled by the art setup, so I never know for sure what it has and hasn't been set up on each spaceship. But the problem with the feature is the cost doesn't. It's quite difficult to control the cost of this. So one spaceship floating around in space, if you put shadows in them lights, no problem at all. You park 50 of them all together, pointing at each other in a really busy location, and you all get out your spaceships and jump around in front of them and stack up boxes and all the crazy things that people do in the PU. It's going to start costing a serious amount of GPU to do that. So we have to figure out how we can add it, yet keep it under control in the more difficult scenarios. And it's been suggested as we can just fade these shadows out when they're too costly, but that actually becomes much more complicated than you think, because what you don't want to happen is as you move your camera around and look around the scene, things are popping on and off all the time. You want a stable, consistent visual. But we've got some ideas of how we might handle that to try and avoid the issue. And we might employ the same idea for all types of dynamic lights, from like ships, your helmet light, your flashlights, and muzzle flashes on guns is another request to have shadows. All these things, the muzzle flashes especially, is something that it'd be great to have shadows from the muzzle flashes. But if 50 people are firing in a room, then maybe you can say, "Oh, we don't care so much." But it's things we could also just, mostly we could provide to the user, like to say, do you want these? How many dynamic lights do you want to support? Let them choose if they want to pay that cost. But there is also some internal budgets we couldn't. We have basically like a texture pool where all the shadows go into. Once we've exceeded that, there is just no more space without sacrificing the quality in the rest of the level. So yeah, I'm hoping we can come up with some type of system where how many dynamic lights do you want? Maybe 8 might be a default, or 4, something like that, and then you can scale up to whatever you want if you want to take that hit when you have a really busy scenario. So hopefully, but yeah, the ship ones are particularly problematic because they can cast thousands of meters and cover huge areas, which means, if you cover a whole space station, there might be a few thousand draw calls in that space station, which is like instructions for the GPU. You just doubled that by pointing your light at it. And 50 people pointing 50 lights at it, 50 times the cost for that space station. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Besides the ship lights and the shoutcasting, another graphical tech thing that comes up quite often. I've seen it a couple times in the chat already today, and it was in the thread as well. RTTs to use as exterior cameras for ships. Ideally, one at the bottom to make landing a whole lot easier for folks. Is there anything you can tell us about?
I'm also going to point you to a Todd Pappy or someone again, or another design director, maybe John Crew. I've actually been pushing for this. I want this, but with one giant gotcha. I don't want a photorealistic camera. I'd prefer, mainly because of cost. I think you'll pay a frame rate cost when that happens. If you play a racing game like any Forza or something like this, they'll have like their wing mirrors and their rear view camera, but they have heavily optimized their game to make that work, and they've heavily optimized what happens in that rear view camera. You'll notice they never look as good. We have a hugely complicated game. There's much more than just a road race. So we have orbit, gas clouds, we have all sorts going on. So to render all of that again, theoretically, in an external camera is, a worst case scenario could halve your frame rate, which we don't want. So more sensible for me is that we do some kind of like LiDAR, depth camera, the type of thing you'd actually be able to get in cars in real life. And I think that'd be far more useful, to be honest, because imagine if you're landing a giant spaceship on like a space station, you don't really have any sense of scale. Like it's an enormous beast, and you're landing on what might be just something that's like concrete or just tiled metal panels. You don't know how close you are. So I think something that really kind of gives you a great sense of depth, even if there's not a lot of interest there. Or let's say a better example might be landing on a snowy mountain. You won't be able to tell anything if we just show you a white picture underneath a spaceship. So yeah, I think a depth camera or LiDAR or some type of holographic, some type of nice imaginative non-photoreal render would be very cheap and be cool. So yeah, I'd love that. As long as design don't ask the photoreal, then I'll hide.
Lots of folks in chat have been asking about ultra-wide support, scaling for things like chat HUD, personal inventory, etc. Some of these monitors are getting super ridiculously wide now, 32:9 and stuff like that. What are the challenges involved? What can you guys tell us about better ultra-wide support?
So I myself using a ultra-wide support monitor, so I know about the issues with Star Citizen. Unfortunately, we as graphics and engine, we don't have too much to do with that. It's more like a question for UI and how they implement it, especially like in the building block system, and yeah, just how the UI scales with all those different monitor resolutions. I'm not sure, maybe Ali knows a little bit more about that, if there are priorities on that, or
no, none the wiser.
He's nodding his head. No, not me. We've actually got something with the UI team scheduled here in the next 2 months, I think. So,
okay, prepare. Lots of questions for them then.
There's a few graphical things like of ultrawide that we sometimes need to fix or improve the performance of, maybe or sometimes the quality of maybe our post effects aren't always amazing in super wide. And also if you use super wide, depending on how we deal with the aspect ratio, you can end up with more objects to render, and obviously you have more pixels to render. So, Gen 12 and other optimizations like DLSS and things we've talked about would all help there. But yeah, in terms of just making it a fun experience with where you position the HUD and the chat windows and stuff, it's all on the UI team, the engine. We don't really have any control of that.
Let's see. We've only got 10 minutes to go. Let's see what more we can squeeze in here. Are there any plans in the future to dynamically use more VRAM for cards that have it available? For example, the game seems to use 6 gigs on my 3090, but I have 24 gigs available. Would you Also, would more VRAM usage allow for better frames or higher quality textures?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want more?
question.
Yeah. So first thing I'd say is you don't want to use 24 gigs just because you can. Like, you want to use what you need. But yeah, so the question is the quality improvements we could make, which way we could use them 24 gigs. At the moment, the system is such that basically it assumes it wants to achieve the resolution you ask for. So if you ask for 4K, it's going to spend a lot of memory achieving 4K. It looks at what memory it's got left on your graphics card, and it says, okay, I'll use all that's left on the meshes and textures. And it will scale up the texture budget up until about 3 or 4 gigs, I think the internal limit is, of how much it'll use on textures. We could uncap that 3 gig limit and put it to 100 gigs or whatever, and it'll just try and load all the textures in the game for you. The only reason we haven't really uncapped that is it doesn't usually lead to any visual improvement. Like 3 gigabytes tends to get you every single texture we have on screen loaded at the highest quality we have available. So raising it up is just risks a little bit. We might get some streaming issues where your hard drive just starts churning away, and maybe you've got a fast hard drive, it's okay, but maybe you don't have such a fast hard drive and you're wondering why the game runs slow, and because it's trying to load the 24 gigs of textures you've asked for, which you don't really need. So that's what the situation today. Where we want to be, though, with once we've finished Gen 12, is to expose some of these numbers to the player instead. So you pick your resolution, and it shows you how much memory is left, and you pick how much texture resolution you want to use. And then you can down-res, up-res, and then if you want to hang yourself, put 24 gigs of textures, and maybe it does look better, maybe it doesn't, but we'll give that to user to pick how they distribute the memory. One thing I would say is one thing that would be nice, which we can't promise, but it was something that definitely is a future option, is to have a high-res texture pack. We offer all of our textures at double the resolution we actually ship them at. But there's several issues in trying to achieve that at the moment. Mainly just the size of the build would obviously go enormously high. And that has costs associated with it as well. On the back end side, there's some money, a cost for bandwidth. So we also have some tasks in the pipeline to reduce the size of the build. So this is stuff that's type of a higher level decision than we can make in our team, but maybe if we have the textures available and we have the technology to use them, we also save a bunch of memory on the build. Maybe we get to a point where it's more viable to have a high-res texture pack. And then the people that do have 20 gigs or whatever of memory will have a very real reason to use that memory. And if you say double the resolution of every texture, that would be 4 times the texture memory. So our 3 gig texture limit might go to 12 gigs instead. At least. So 12 gigs, once you add on 4K and a few other things, you easily get to 16 to 20 gigs of memory. So yeah, this is something in the future, definitely. There is some technologies as well in the future that we might use that could eat up some of that memory, things like ray tracing and SDFs, distance fields that are used for various pieces of technology. These all consume extra memory. We just have to make sure the game can still scale so that the people that have 6 gigs or whatever can still run the game sensibly.
You understand, I have to put everything ultra max, ultra, right? It just all the sliders got to go up, Ali.
Yeah.
Not worth playing if I can't max everything out.
Interestingly, a lot of old games used to let you max out beyond what your GPU could do. I think some games now have taken the approach that we're talking about here, where if you max them all out, it will not let you like it. If you want to run your game at 8K and to have all the textures loaded in the world, it's not going to happen. There's no space physically there. So yeah, it will type of force you to live within the constraints of your GPU.
There should be a whole new difficulty level settings and graphic settings, like the Demon Souls version of graphic settings. That you run the risk of murdering your computer.
We definitely hope to have that. Yeah, that's definitely a goal we want. Why not?
All right, let's see if we can drop some more engine-related questions in before we get going. Let's see. Is it planned to support direct storage on Windows 11, and do you expect a performance boost from it?
We have at least taken a look at that, but we already have custom technology in place to improve the memory transfer to the GPU. So it's unclear if we can gain a lot of performance from that. It's something we will have to take a deeper look into, a measure, and check where it makes sense, if it makes sense, and then it will probably be implemented. The diplomatic answer here.
All right. This next question is about LODs and distance. What's being done with this? The pop-in is honestly dreadful, and seems the render distance for ground foliage, trees, rocks, and such is so low that it is really jarring visually compared to anything else. Will this change or increase due to Gen 12 or Vulkan implementation, or what can you tell us overall? LOD popping.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. The thing is that that's mostly decided by Art how they want to set it up. Of course, it's measured based on performance. So, but well, Gen 12 and Vulkan, it'll improve render performance, and I think we will scale it up at one point. But yeah, I'm not sure what exactly is planned there, if there's anything official yet. So
yeah, there's plans, or not concrete, but definitely discussions with the Planet Tech team about how we can take things one level higher. Type of at the moment, basically each object is considered in its an individual object in the scene. It's type of spawned and managed the position of it. We do have some small scales grouping where like we might group 5 or 10 objects together. But what you need if you want to say render an entire rainforest is the ability to have millions of trees, and just to have the concept exist of an individual tree means that becomes beyond the reach of a sensible speed computer. You need to have the concept of it. This is a whole, this is a patch of forest that might be a kilometer wide or 10 kilometers wide, and the trees either never existed individually and they're type of a group, or they are being type of spawned extremely quickly and then merged into one type of uber clump that we just type of can submit to the GPU, or even not even submit to the GPU, but like type of just render on the GPU without any CPU involvement. But the current approach of type of having one object, type of constructed and then sent to the GPU each frame, it just doesn't scale quite to the level we need. But yeah, Gen 12 will give us like a big boost on what would be possible with the current system. But yeah, there's plans for the extreme LODs, we'd call them, like the rainforest, where you can just see for miles and miles of trees. That needs something slightly different for that to work.
And all these objects on the planets, they're already using a more specialized path to be rendered much quicker than our usual objects, like all those brushes. But yes, Ali pointed out, if we want to have like really dense lush forests like you've seen in Microsoft Flight Simulator, there's definitely a lot of room to improve, and definitely something we're looking at, aware of, and yeah, hopefully we'll implement something in the future about that.
Well, we're just about out of time, so let's end with something a little more general. For graphics engine performance, Gen 12, what's the immediate future look like? Like what do you got on your agenda for the next 3-6 months? Here, no dates, just what are you working towards right now?
Well, as I already pointed out at the beginning, we want to finish Gen 12. So there are a few more milestones we have to finish. The transparent rendering, that's the biggest one. And yeah, once that's done, I expect all the other things which are missing, which more like a few compute passes, like planet atmosphere stuff and like compute skinning and a few other things we're probably have overlooked yet, are finished. Then Gen 12 is done, and I'm really excited to see how much performance we gain from that. And after that, we can Vulkan, which is not lagging too far behind, because like in general we're developing Gen 12 and Vulkan in parallel. And Vulkan is just lagging a little bit behind. So once Gen 12 is done, it shouldn't take us too long to even get a first version of Vulkan working.
Okay. Anything you want to add to that, Ali? Jonas?
No, we've got these guys are Gen 12 on the engine team. We've got about half the graphics team on Gen 12 as well. The ones that aren't on that are working on a number of features. Mainly, there's a bit of a backlog for S42, type of the critical features we need for that. They'll obviously feed into the PU as well. There's very little that would be specific to Squadron. It's more just, who is the prime need for each feature. But yeah, there's a few features in the works for them. Some research for longer term features like jump points to the graphical implementation of that. Things like improving the water effects is something that's on the type of near term goals as well. And unifying them, we have like a planet ocean shader, we have a water volume shader, we have a river shader. These things all need work and love, and integrate them with the VFX as well. We've lost in the transition of our engine over to all the improvements we've made with planets and stuff. We've lost like splashes and dynamic waves and stuff like this. So we need to reintroduce these types of technologies. And that's it. But yeah, mainly over half the team on Gen 12, and when that's done, they'll be on Vulcan until that is running buttery smooth. And even then, that team might then look at the DLS FSR type approaches, and only then will the type of join the rest of the team on the general graphics features.
Cool.
Yeah, two more things I would like to say really quickly. Like one of the questions was, could we pay a beer to Christopher Bolty? So I want to have a small shout out to Bolty for all the nice improvements he did for 3.17, and he claimed all those improvements for himself internally. So give him a big shout out. And one last thing, I've promised one of my friends. Okay, there's your dab.
Yeah, that's all right. I think they might have finally found out the way to make sure I never invite them back on the show ever again. Dab. We're gonna see Ian Leland dab on the next show just to get out of it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, Jonas, Silvan, and Allie, for taking time out of the end of your week to be here on the show. Folks, if you haven't, check out yesterday's Inside Star Citizen. It was a special Tools Time episode detailing the work of two of our Tools teams, one in Montreal and one in UK, on some recent things that they've done. It's not the flashiest show, but it's the kind of thing that only Star Citizen would ever touch and explore. So those tend to be my favorite. And so thank you so much for indulging me in those really, really esoteric behind the scenes stuff. We'll be back next week with a all sprint report ish episode of Inside Star Citizen, so that you have all that, so that you can get all your cool visuals and stuff back. And then we're back here next week on SCL. I think it's the modular content team. I'm not sure. It's my schedule's all upside down right now. But take care. Remember that Invictus launch week was just announced yesterday, the day before. Check that out for the full schedule on what ship manufacturers are going on what day. And yeah, we'll see you next week, everybody. Take care. Bye.
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 Don't you dab on my show.
Ah.